Good afternoon. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay,
yes, I can.
Just doing a test run of the audio to be sure that it's working. Tenny, thank you so much.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, thank you so much for joining us. So we'll just wait for our other panelists.
Okay.
I can just see yourself. I am yet to see Oliver and
Yes.
And also Fatola as well. They're yet to join. So let's just give them a bit of a time. We have just 9 minutes before it's 2 o'clock. So we hope that they'll be able to join by then.
Okay. I wanted to also ask about rerun, or not rerun, but generally I saw the questions. Are we sticking to those or?
Well, basically the questions are to guide our discussions and also help you know the way the thoughts of
the area.
our thoughts are running. Yes. Perfect. And it doesn't really give us like a closed box. We can still delve into other areas if the time permits, please.
Okay, that's perfect.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Should I have a conference call? That's why I'm dressed up. Just keep noise behind.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Ebere Akwebo, and I'm going to be our host for today's webinar series that is being organized by the Center for Climate Change and Sustainable Development, codenamed 3CSD. And I hope Professor Swain, is it okay to start off?
Oh, yes, please. Yes.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
we have a good number.
I'm
so we can
looking
start.
at the number of participants that we have, and that's why I'm
All
asking
these
that
names, I
question.
want to.
Sorry, Tani, you said something?
I didn't say anything. No.
Oh, okay. Okay, so well, well, the video thing is probably to help us reduce bandwidth, and so that we don't have any interruptions. So if need be, then we might need to just turn off our videos for a while and then maybe put it on when we're speaking. That would really help us, please. Okay, so we're talking about mainstreaming climate change into mainstreaming culture into climate change response for social transformation and sustainable development today. And it's quite intriguing for me because I recently just started looking at it from that perspective. I've never really given it a thought that you could actually bring cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, or practices into issues with climate change. But we're all aware that climate change is being described as the greatest environmental challenge of our century because the way it's interwoven with science and other economic issues, and then such as the threat to attainment of our sustainable development goals. Now, despite contributing the least to global greenhouse gases, Africa as a nation as a continent is the most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change and has had the least capacity for mitigation and adaptation, and even to build resilience to climate change. Now, from rising temperatures to increased incidence of natural disasters, floods, droughts, deforestation, desertification, among other things, there is a need to interrogate and explore different strategies that will increase Africa's capacity for mitigation, adaptation, and also build resilience to climate change and its impacts. Now, although the impacts across different geographical zones vary in extent and in severity, Nigeria as a nation is highly vulnerable to climate change. Now, according to researches and reports on assessments of Nigeria's vulnerability, various sectors of the economy, including those related to human settlement and health, water resources, industry, commerce, agriculture, food security, land degradation, forestry, biodiversity, coastal habitats, marine zones are found to be very vulnerable to climate change and its impacts. And the response to these things, I mean, it's different. So many strategies have come in by way of mitigation, adaptation, and resilient strategies, and also to build resilience, but they are all relevant. I mean, are all of this really relevant to helping to mitigate impacts of climate change? So mainstreaming culture in response to environmental degradation and climate change is necessary for sustainable and compatible development. Why do we say this? Because culture is an essential tool in different regions to generate community engagement and buy-in. It also helps to support interconnectedity with policies agenda, such as urban planning, social inclusion, health, commerce, and regeneration, culture can be a useful tool for achieving support for poverty alleviation measures and social programs. So to set up for today's discussion, I would we have about 3 individuals, and I find their profiles very interesting. We have Oliver. Please permit me and forgive me if I do murder your name a little. Oliver Enwowo, I hope I'm correct. Ms. Temi Majekudumi and Fatola Lawal. But before we get into the profiles of our speakers, I'd like the director of the Center for Climate Change and Sustainable Development, Professor Oluwatoyin Adejonwu Osho, to quickly give us an opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome again to the maiden conversations at Free CSD. My name is Oluwatoyin Adejonwu. I am the founder and the director of the Center for Climate Change and Sustainable Development. Free CSD is a research led and advocacy-driven organization that is based in Lagos. We firmly believe at 3CSD that advocacy and intervention should be led by research in order to be able to deliver an impactful outcome. Our dreams and vision are to advance solutions for climate-compatible development in Africa, to enhance climate resilience, adaptation, and mitigation. And of course, to achieve this, we have identified 5 strategic priority areas for the next 3 years. And one of that is the aim to engage in high-impact research in select sectors, including the arts and culture sector. So we plan to specifically to engage in projects with key stakeholders within that sector and to use a variety of methods and tools to ensure that climate responses are culturally relevant and creative whilst being effective and sustainable. I'm really excited that we're able to start this conversation, and of course I can assure you that this would not be the end of the conversation. Like I said, we are an organization that is driven by research, and this is one of one of the areas. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. I yield the floor to the host. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Oluwatoyin. Now, we have with us today Oliver Enwowo. Oliver is an art historian, publisher, creator, and artist. Oliver is the director and founder of Omenka Gallery, as well as CEO of Revilo Company, publishers of Omenka, Africa's First Act, Business and Luxury Style Magazine and Network. This bi-monthly magazine of the Nigerian British Chamber of Commerce. Okay, this is a magazine of a bi-monthly magazine of the Nigerian British Chamber of Commerce. He's a fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants, FIMC, CMC, and sits on the board of several organizations, including the Lagos Biennial. Now, from 2009 to July 2021, Oliver served as the president of the Society of Nigerian Artists, which was established in 1963 as the umbrella professional body for all artists in Nigeria. And previously, he served on the Reproduction Rights Society of Nigeria, as well as the governing board of the National Gallery of Art Nigeria, and was appointed member of the advisory group on technology and creativity in the Nigerian Industrial Policy and Competitiveness Advisory Council, chaired by His Excellency, the Vice President of Nigeria this should be the immediate past Vice President, Professor Yemi Oshibajo. In addition, he was appointed by the federal government as chairman, Visual Arts Subcommittee of the Post-COVID-19 Initiative for the creative industry. We're also joined today by Ms. Temi Majekudumi. who is a lawyer and carbon finance expert on the Kyoto Protocol's Clean Development Mechanism, CDM. She is the CEO and founder of Eco Exchange Limited, which focuses on identifying and developing CDM projects at various stages. Tenny is a certified environmental, social, and governance expert, ESG. She has completed several courses on renewable energy and sustainability, including at the Welsh Institute of Natural Resources, University of Bangor, Wales, United Kingdom. She sits on the Interministerial Committee on Climate Change of the Federal Ministry of Environment, the Committee on Biofuels to the Secretary to the State Government of the Federation, and an active participant in the African Working Group for CDM Capacity Development. Tenny is also the founder of the Electric Cheek brand, which was established to raise the bar for African products internationally, with a clear focus on developing the craft industry in Nigeria and empowering women while doing so. That ministers to me. Ms. Tenny is a strong supporter of women economic empowerment and works hard to ensure women have a seat in the business world. We also have with us today Mr. Fatola Israel Lawal. He is the creative director of Heavenly Arts, a creative brand set to illustrate human experiences through art with a creative fusion of film, documentary, storytelling, poetry, and visual arts. Several of his works have been awarded and has featured in numerous group shows all across the world. Mr. Fatola Israel Ayodamilola studied visual arts in the University of Lagos and holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in painting. Through his artwork, Mr. Fatola intends to provoke emotion in his viewers that expresses the conditions of humans and the nation at large, and also thereafter inspires positive actions that would solve more problems in the world today. So I have a very interesting profile of panelists, and it really quite interests me to know that we can integrate culture into climate change management. And
recording in progress.
One of the objectives of today's discussion is basically to be able to sensitize relevant stakeholders with the knowledge that culture can be a powerful tool in engaging community response and engendering environmental protection and addressing environmental challenges. The stakeholders include practitioners in combined arts, design, fashion, literature, and spoken words, media, museums, and heritage, music, theater, visual arts, relevant government ministries and agencies, civil society groups, and academia. And that's why we have this. We have our panelists cut across these different fields. So I understand that culture implies a way of life of a people. It includes their religion, heritage, and for me, basically, is what defines a people, and then understanding what climate change is all about. So I'm wondering, so what are the cultural factors behind human impact on the environment? And I want to know how this plays out overall on the issue of climate change, and then bringing culture into it. So I would like Temi, can you start off for us, please? Hello,
Thank
Temi,
you very much thank you so much for having me on here. And it's very interesting to see how, I know a lot of people have thought climate change and culture, what is the connection? But it's so refreshing to see the importance of it and the fact that something that seems so remote is an issue that connects all of us all together, and also is imperative literally to the future of our sustainable development. And in terms of your question, cultural factors behind human impact is the main part that's always forgotten about. If you look at even just the building blocks of culture, and you have arts and crafts, art in the creative sector, you have just human nature. Culture is the driving force. A lot of all these other, sorry, there's a lot of background noise. I don't know if it's possible to mute the other people. Yeah, muted, Eberi.
Okay, so please, can we all mute our microphones and our devices, basically, so that we can have less interruptions? I've tried to do that from my end here, so all participants are muted. Okay, so I should be better now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So for instance, from my perspective, I would answer it from my perspective. I'm a lawyer. I've worked in this space for almost 20 years, and I've also then focused on realizing that, you know, just like today's topic, culture does play an important part. And I've seen that another aspect of my second hat.
Sorry, Tenny. So Vivian, can you mute yourself, please?
And Ebenezer.
And Ebenezer, please. Vivian and Ebenezer, can you please kindly mute yourself?
And Samuel, I think.
Vivian.
I think you can mute them from your end.
I've actually muted all, but it appears they're still on. I've done that. I've tried to mute everyone from my end here because I've clicked on the mute all.
Okay. But what I just wanted to even just say from a cultural perspective, from a fashion perspective, my second hat, you know, as you rightly said, is I have a social impact enterprise, which I founded 11 years ago. And the reason for that is to see that something like sustainable development overarches over so many aspects, from even just the climate perspective as carbon credits, and a lawyer from that perspective, as well as the fashion component. And I was able to see the correlation between having a sustainable brand and also just being in the sustainable space. And from it made it very clear that culture does have a good response to this industry.
Can I take umbrella or raincoat?
Oh,
and so if
Ebenezer, please can you mute yourself?
I think everybody muted.
But Ebenezer is still unmuted, and it's the noise from their end that is actually interrupting the discussion.
Okay, thank you, Ebenezer. So if you look at the fashion economy now, for instance, I'm going to now delve down into that part of the creative sector, because I know Mr. Enwenwu and Mr. Fatola are in the arts and crafts, and I'll leave them to talk about their perspective. From the fashion, if you look at the whole there's now the circular economy, because you could see that fashion industry has a huge overconsumption problem and waste problem. And a lot of work has now been done in that sector to be able to push people to start looking and thinking better about how they use. From going now, there's more of a fashion swaps. I know Lagos Fashion Week had some fashion swaps whereby people swap their clothes, and that way you're reducing the amount of emissions you're using or buying. In fact, overproduction and overconsumption is reduced. Now there's a big economy that is almost about, I have the facts here, $80 billion worth of the circular fashion economy in the whole world. And that is because people are now recycling, reusing, and renting and buying clothes. So there's the upcycle aspect, there's a renting aspect, there's the buying aspect from people that have worn. Just each sector of the arts and creative sector, all trying to do their own bit to reduce their own emissions and reduce and to mitigate. That will go a longer way to be able to create a more conscious environment. And that will generally just, you know, help what we're trying to achieve with being a more sustainable future. I don't know if I should stop there, but I just don't want to go on too much so that other people can also say more. But I'll just pause.
We'll put a pause on that and ask Oliver, do you want to quickly put in a word? Oliver?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Let me also say thank you for inviting me to this panel. Thank you. You can't overemphasize the importance of climate change and what we're going through in the world right now. I'll say, first of all, that it's extremely important, first of all, to understand how people think. When you think about the definition of culture being the sum totality of human experience, be it cultural, socio-political, or economical, or even religious, then you ask yourself, why is it that in Africa, despite the fact that we're very open, I mean, the risk of climate change here, I mean, we talk about Lagos in the next 40 years or thereabout being submerged. Why is it that we're not able to do much more than just basic awareness? I think that is because, most of these policies, first of all, are not directed at the way of thinking, the way that people think. When you think, first of all, of how Africa and what Africa has gone through, for instance, we have a long history of colonialism, we have a long history of coup d'etats in Africa, we have a long history of, and because of these various events, we have been impacted negatively in the sense that we've lost our language, we've lost our knowledge systems, the way of thinking, all our histories. So you have to build models, that will be better assimilated by these people. Think about how they think in terms of their land. Think about how they think in terms of their gods, in terms of how they think in terms, of their trees, and make sure that the policies, imbibe some of these factors. I think this is extremely important. Otherwise, you'll find out that policies hit the ground flat. The best Harvard business model will not necessarily work in Nigeria if you don't factor in epileptic supply. So how do the people think? Another thing that you want to think about is gender. Gender is very major when you talk about climate awareness and how we're able to deal with climate change, especially when you think, for instance, that the family is the smallest unit of culture, for instance, and that a woman is the one who keeps the home. When you think that women are not being put into places where they will influence policy changes, then of course your policies will fall. Women are excellent excellent water resource. I think climate change policies that are the home. I think these are
Why is showing your teeth? Why is showing your teeth?
Hello?
Wait, what's that?
Sorry, can Stanley please mute himself?
Stanley, please,
Please
can you
mute.
mute yourself? Mute yourself, please, Stanley. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so if I may, sorry, Oliver, just a second. We discussion, and we really appreciate if we could all put our microphones on mute. And if you need to speak, you can raise your hand, show a raise of hand, or if you need to ask any questions, and we're expecting for us to ask questions at the end of the discussion, try to allow us to work with our time and also make sure that we're able to cover a lot of ground with today's discussion. So please, again, let's put our microphones on mute, and then if you need to ask any questions in the course of the discussion, please raise your hand and then we can unmute you. We can ask that you unmute yourself. At the same time, if you want to use the chat box, you can put your questions and comments in the chat box. Thank you very much. Okay, so please go on, Oliver. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem. I spoke earlier about policy changes, and how policies have to be directed the way of people thinking. I'll give, for instance, each African has accepted modernity on their own terms. When you look at how we've accepted Christianity, for instance, you find out that, we will become Christians, but then we still take traditional chieftaincy titles. And that's how we accept our religion. And that's one example that I would use to explain how various climate models, most policy changes for climate have to be adapted to the way we think and our way of thinking. I've also talked about gender and how, of course, the woman is the head of a home and how she's an excellent water resource manager, and how she, and all of these impact positively or negatively on climate change. We'll also speak about how women, I'm speaking about gender now, how they need to be appointed, to places, or into positions rather, where they can influence policy change. And I also talk about the state of preparedness, which I think is another important factor when you consider human beings, knowing full well that we men, we feel that we're very macho and masculine, and therefore, the first person that policy changes affect would be the woman, because her state of preparedness is significantly lower. How does she respond, and how is she going to make policies that will be able to cater to her needs, especially when it comes to climate change? So I think these are the first points I would like to raise in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Oliver. That has been very insightful. I like the fact that you brought in the gender perspective to the whole thing. And I am one person that likes promotes the fact that women should be put in more decision-making roles, because they have a unique relationship with the environment because of the way they interact with it. But before we go on, okay, we'd like Mr. Fatola, please, you have the floor, please. Mr. Fatola, please. Okay, is he with us? I did notice that he joined a while back. I don't know if he's logged up. Mr. Fatola. Okay, so I think he's logged off right now.
No, he's actually he's on the list of participants. He just needs to unmute himself.
So what is he using? Because I can't see what his
I see his name, Fatola.
Okay, so if you can hear me, Mr. Fatola, please, can you unmute yourself? Okay, so I'm trying to send him a chat and saying to unmute yourself. Okay, so.
Hello.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I think I'm having network issues, but I'm here now.
We can hear you. We can hear you now. Thank you. You're welcome, sir.
All right. Okay,
what
so
we said, we're starting with what are the cultural factors behind human impact on the environment. That's what we're starting our discussion with. So let's get your views on that. Let's get your views on that, please.
Okay, so I think when I think about cultural factors that can add to the topic that we're discussing, I look at it from the perspective of environmental awareness and education. And that starts from, from the grassroots, right? Because I am a full-time creative artist, and I believe part of what adds to what I do distinctively is the education and exposure that I have growing up while I was undertaking, my professional degree, both from the secondary school level up to the university level, right? So I believe, the awareness that we have to do from that aspect is very crucial, because creative artists are strongly influenced by their environment, right? So we need a kind of stable curriculum in place, that educates people, that enlightens them in a creative way, right? Because everybody has different approaches to like how they interpret things, right? People can come to talk about climate change. People can come to talk about global warming. But from a creative standpoint, how are we educating them to like create a safe environment that allows for them to express themselves? Because art is a very deep, it's a very personal means of self-expression from a creative standpoint. In Africa, where natural resources are abundant, raising awareness about environmental issues is crucial. Art can play a pivotal role in disseminating information. For instance, like according to a study by the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, cultural culturally relevant storytelling and visual art, according to UNESCO, can enhance environmental education and local engagement. And this actually results in better understanding and adoption of sustainable practices. We also have cultural traditions, indigenous knowledge. Africa is very rich. We boast a rich tapestry of like indigenous cultures with deep-rooted connections to nature. And the indigenous peoples, biocultural climate change assessments initiatives also reports that, indigenous communities, traditional knowledge contributes significantly to sustainable land and resource management. And this is made possible by integrating cultural insights into the works that these artists are doing. So we have people that are painters, we have people that are sculptors, we have people that are urban artists, people that do creative works on walls, people that do things on buildings, works on canvases, and they come up with works that actually address all these topics in many of the subject matters that they're trying to talk about in their art. So I believe we need to educate people, and then once we are able to do that, then we can begin to see the traces of this education, this level of awareness, this level of information. We can begin to see it reflect in the works that they do. And once we're able to do that, at least I feel that's the first step. We have so many other things that we can touch on, but once artists are able to create works, are able to speak through their works to address all these things, then I feel that's a very good step to addressing the issue.
You were talking, I remembered there's this Turkish artist. I recently found him online. His name is Sadiq, Dennis Sadiq, and his work has become popular at the airports because he uses recycled materials to create very beautiful works of art. And a couple of years back, when we had the climate, when I participated in an event in Lagos State Ministry of Environment, there was this young person as well that came with some art work that was made from bottle cups and all that, and I found it very, very interesting. And the creation or the things that he made were more like trying to tell a story. And so I like your perspective too. So I'll start with you. I like the perspective you're drawing to it, and because it helps to say, okay, we shouldn't be throwing away things as much as we can. We should be able to recycle, because when we recycle those things, we put things back. And Tenny mentioned something about upcycling earlier. And I know that the SDG office, they had this initiative as well, where they had people from the fashion industry try to promote reusing clothes. And you know that we have a funny culture here. If you had to recycle your clothes or you had to reuse clothes, we have a mentality that use clothes, for instance, they are for people that are from low income or poor backgrounds and all that. But you see, the way the world is going with the kind of emissions that is coming from the fashion industry, I think we're moving towards that direction, that really having expensive materials to showcase at the expense of the environment are things we need to start reconsidering. And then for Oliver, I totally like the gender perspective you brought to the whole thing, and it helps us to be, because women, aside from also being home and environmental custodians, that's what I refer to women as, they're also cultural custodians, and they have a way of bringing all those things to bear in the way they end up making decisions, and which I think can be factored in at the upper level. So if we have a bottom to top approach to all of these things, I think it really helps us. And let me also ask this to our three panelists. Do you think that cultural beliefs can be integrated into reducing the risk and impacts of climate change, or do you think it will touch on too many cultural taboos? What I mean is that, culture depicts our way of life, our heritage, I mean, the way we've been raised. Because while researching for this program, I listened to a particular community somewhere in Europe where in Asia, where they had issues with flooding, and they did not want to leave their natural habitat because they believed that they had protection from their deities. Meanwhile, they were having sea level rise, and it was going to wipe out the entire community. So do you think that cultural beliefs can be integrated into or mainstreamed into climate change mitigation, or do you think it's going to impinge on too many cultural taboos? Thank you. Okay, so any of you can actually speak to this, please. Thank you.
Well, and I think that it can be properly done when you take the beautiful aspects of our culture. Of course, the negative aspects, and the beauty about culture is that it's dynamic and it changes with time, to serve the needs of newer generations. For instance, amongst I'm from Onitsha, Igbo, we have various traditions that may not necessarily that need to be attenuated. For instance, when a man dies, for his wife to prove that she's not complicit in his death, she has to perform certain rituals, and all of that, just to be sure that she's free of all accusations. Now, that, for instance, is not necessarily a good tradition to perpetuate. Another one is the issue of bride price. Many people argue with us, but do you want to see your daughter as being up for sale, for instance, or is the bride price symbolic? So I think how we are today is we're evolving, and you take beautiful things of our culture. For instance, in accepting on our own terms, we've assimilated the best of Western traditions and that with our own indigenous cultures. So you can take the beautiful aspects. Of course, another important thing that we can look at is what are the roles, because we have structures, traditional structures. Each community has a head, you have traditional rulers, and we need to utilize their influence over their people even better to tell the right stories. If we're able to tell the right stories, for instance, about our land in nature, the same place that I spoke of where a woman has to prove her innocence, is the same place where New Yam is celebrated every season, and the king comes out to show that we've had a bountiful harvest, and he gives praise to the land, and it gives offerings to the land. Now, if the people understand that the New Yam, which is bountiful, which feeds the whole community, and excess of it can be sold to bring in money for the community members, and all of that, then you will understand that you can use that in itself to preserve the earth itself when the people know how important the earth is. So some of these cultures are actually beautiful. And if you look at African culture, it's rich. The fact that, I'll give another example. When you watch home movies, for instance, and then you see the Babalawos, if you understand the Babalawos themselves were not the sort that will interfere in people's marriages, because you see that a lot, for instance, in home movies where, a woman wants to take another person's husband, and so she goes to Babalawo. When you understand the traditional use of the Babalawo as someone who, created medications that will cure sicknesses and all that, and you see that it's a much bigger position and responsibility, that has been misinterpreted through movies. So you see how if, people can have the right meanings to their culture, and then imbibe them, or imbibe aspects of that into creating the right awareness for climate change, you can see how powerful it is when you understand that we are still very traditional in our beliefs. And if you look at decolonization today, you see that, we're evolving, back to how we used to be. I mean, it's a simple look, for instance, at Lagos on weekends, and you see how people are beginning to wear our borders, how African music, Afrobeat music is making, the world center stage. And you see that we're beginning to decolonize You know, we're beginning to take the best aspects of our culture. So now more than ever, it is important for us to take the best aspects of our culture and use that, you know, to solve pertinent issues affecting Africa and the rest of the world. Thank you.
For that, Oliver. Tini, do you want to add anything, Fatola?
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I really enjoyed what Oliver's just said, and I really agree with it. And it's really, as going back to your question of, is culture, the word you used, is it a negative impact, having a negative impact or a positive impact? I think it's up to us to be able to channel it and drive it in the way we want it to be, to have a positive impact. And just as Oliver had just mentioned about how, you know, our culture is literally our music, and we're exporting all these things now to the world. So they can be a conduit to be able to drive the message out, to be able to improve sustainable development and create a better sustainable future for us. So it's really up to us to make people more conscious, because it's really just about consciousness. If you're more conscious about being more mitigating your ways of living and being more sustainable, then you would, well, one, you would transfer that by word of mouth, and that would also grow to make other people to become more conscious. Two, you will start to naturally find better ways to be able to manage your day-to-day, and even just your resilience, building your resilience to being more climate friendly. And so it's really about just using our culture and how widespread our culture can be in a positive way to make people more conscious about being more climate resilient. And I think if everyone just starts small, a bigger impact will be made, and a faster impact will be made that way. And so to answer your question, it's yes, culture definitely can be used to improve and to target what we're trying to achieve with a sustainable future.
Sorry, Fatola, you have it? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So to add to what they've already said, I mean, everybody has spoken well. There's never a better time than now to begin to even incorporate more of what we do. I was fortunate to be part of the design team for the Calabar Carnival. So there was a time where, you know, we had to come together to create some concepts in terms of the headgears. And I don't know if anybody here has been familiar with, you know, the Calabar Carnival. It's been going on for many years now. It happens towards the end. Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
just once for me, yeah. The one that featured the Nollywood actress in Edo. I think she was one of the things. Yes, I watched it.
Brilliant. So we can see that, like, you know, this is it's a community engagement kind of activity, right? It also can also serve as a means of activism, because many of these costumes that these people wear, many of these things that they put on, you know, we had to actually source some of these materials from waste. You know, we had to use some. In fact, there were some foams that were thrown away, and we had to like reuse them in a creative way. We had to get scrap metals and incorporate them into, you know, how you can wear the headgears and all that. So when people see things and they come together for such a large gathering, it is what we artists, I feel that's the power we have, right? People look at it and they are blown away, like, oh, wow, like, how did you come up with something like this? How did you create something? And we tell them, oh, okay, this is actually from metal. This is something. And they're like, oh, wow. So that means something that I've actually even thrown away can still be used for such a glamorous, you know, event. You know, it goes a long way. So we need more actions like that. We need more platforms like that, because it's one thing for the artists to create the works, and it's another thing for the platforms to be put in place to allow that these works reach a larger number of people, right? So I feel there are so many other creative ways we can even use the film documentary aspects, like Mr. Oliver said. Also, we can use that to propagate more of, the importance of why we need to keep speaking on this.
Oh, very well said, all of you. So the other question I'd like to ask is, how can creatives use the various expressions of art and culture as tools for creating public awareness, community engagement, political will, and support for policy responses to environmental protection? I know each of you has touched in the course of your comments. Okay, you've touched differently on this. Oliver has talked about policies and all that, but it's one area I want us to really point out on this. Okay, is awareness raising. How much of it can we have using our culture? I mean, to be able to tell the story we want so that people understand this in the simplest of ways, and then they are able to begin to adapt to things that can help protect our environment. Thank you. So Tenny, you have the floor.
Yeah, I'll start with, about 10 years ago now, or 11 years ago, we first of all had a project with British Council. And we were trying to do the same thing you said, capacity building, to be able to get people to understand grassroots. Where do we start from? We want to be able to disseminate. And so we came up with a program called Climate Change and You. It was aired on the radio, and it was getting guest speakers, different people to come in, and experts in the field to be able to start disseminating information. From that, we saw about a 20% increase in the knowledge of climate change by the end of 6 months. By the end of the first half of biennial of that year, we were able to then also understand what people thought climate change was, because they had a completely different view of what it was. 3, we were able to then get the media to use the tools, especially journalists. From that starting of Climate Change and You, I then was able to devise a program called Center of Excellence for Media, annual media program. And then I used to work in Abuja. I used to work with the minister's office. And it was to be able to get all the media journalists in Abuja, and even some from out of Abuja, to write the most on climate change. Their mandate was to write, whoever can write the most about it and study it, do enough research on their own. And every week there must be an article in the papers about it, to be able to get people to, 1, understand what it meant, 2, see how they can buy into it, 3, how they can start telling others about it. And whoever wrote the most at the end of the year, we were able to collate and do MRV to be able to see, okay, fine, we saw a 48% increase in knowledge of climate change. Even the journalists themselves were able to tell more about it, talk more about it, and record more about it and report better. And whoever won, it became a competition. So at the end of the year, whoever wrote the most out of all the journalists got a ticket to COP. And COP is Conference of the Parties, which is the annual climate change conference that happens at the end of every year. And they get a ticket. Second winner got tools to help them improve their reporting. Third one got a laptop. And we were able to come up with 3 prizes. UNFCCC was so engaged in what we were doing that they then joined in on our weekly trainings with the press, and we were able to get 2 speakers from UNFCCC to come in and do. This was during Skype. There was no Zoom then and all these other modes, so it was all on Skype, and it was so interactive, and the response that we got was so overwhelmingly pleasant that we were able to then do another one and do a second one after that. Shortly after that, we now had a few other international organizations like Heinrich Böll Foundation from the German fund and other people who then came up and said, fine, we want to do more of these types of projects. And we gave it a different twist. I know CCDI, it's the Climate Change Development Initiative, is based in Lagos. They then partnered with us, with my outfits, to be able to do something called it was called basically, it was just basically to go to the grassroots this time around. We worked with 774 local governments because we said, okay, we've done it from the high level. We've been able to do it via the newspapers, all those that read newspapers and higher level individuals. But what about the grassroots? How are we going to be able to do it in languages this time around? And so we worked with 774 local governments, and we were able to get each local government. We realized that each local government is also very different. You can't just use the same model for all of them. So we decided to change it this way. We'll train people in certain areas to use the waste that they have and create energy and also create wealth for themselves. And that's how we came about with I ended up terming it Idotitidowo, which means waste is now wealth in Yoruba. So we decided to add a Yoruba component. In Yaba area, there are lots of miscreants and area boys in that area, but there's also a lot of sawdust. So we said, why don't we use the two? Create a way to convert that sawdust into briquettes and train them as well to know how to do that one. Two, to disseminate information and train them in Yoruba on how to be more climate resilient. By doing this, we were able to tick so many boxes. We created wealth for them because it was now a job. We got all the miscreants and area boys off the roads there. They learned a new skill, which they carried on to themselves, and it has had a tripartite effect. 3, they've also been able to reduce their emissions by stop using firewood, because these briquettes, it's like a lever. We put the sawdust inside a lever, you turn the lever over, it turns into a briquette. A briquette is a substitute for charcoal, and you can use that to cook. And so as a result of all these, it ticked so many boxes, and we used culture because we spoke in Yoruba, we created language, we made it easy to understand, and we found that these kinds of projects and programs were more effective in driving the language, driving the mission, or driving the, I've lost my words, but we're driving the plans basically to be able to improve sustainable development. And so, I hope that answers. I'll stop here because I know that there are 2 other people on here, but using arts and culture and also just language was a very, very effective way to be able to drive the message. Yeah, muted.
Fatola, Oliver, can you also just give your own inputs into that question? I hope you got what the question was.
Yeah, I think I remember. First of all, from 2 points, I'll look at it from, as an artist, I'll look at it from production. Then I'll also look at dissemination. First, with production, we'll talk about artists. What materials do they use? Are they using materials that are toxic? We painters have a history of using toxic. And that's why sometimes we have to use masks to protect ourselves. So if we protect ourselves, you can imagine the impact that some of our paints and fumes like turpentine would have on the environment and depleting the ozone layer, for instance. That's very important, especially when artists even creating outdoor works like graffiti, they use spray cans, they use aerosol. What materials are they using? Now, some artists have been known, of course, to take discarded objects that have been thrown away, recycle them and turn them into beautiful art. That's another way of directly sending out a message out there, creating awareness and making sure that they use their works in the right way. Now, are artists also shipping their works, for instance? If you ship your works by air, you know what sort of impact that you would have, on the environment, as opposed to, going by sea freight. Now, we have museums, galleries all over the world. Think about all the art fairs and art festivals that works get shipped to on a continual basis all through the year. Then you can imagine the sort of impact that would have on climate change. Now, you also talk about our processes. For instance, sculptors must always use masks. The sort of equipment they use, are hazardous to the environment. So these are things that I will speak about when it comes to artistic production. Now, when it comes to dissemination, how is this information, about awareness? It's not just about creating beautiful art. That's the easy part. You know, you want to think about the fact that we're now a technologically based society. Predictions have shown that in Africa, for instance, we have a youth population, and in the next couple of years, the majority of 60 to 80% of Africans will be under 30, for instance. When you talk about how technology is growing in leaps and bounds, and our populace, you know, and the number of people that will be using mobile phones, for instance, then you must imagine that whatever information that you're sending out there has to be technologically based. Now, the question I would ask is, our environmental agencies, for instance, do they have operating websites? Are these websites functional? How much information is disseminated on these websites? When you think about how much Instagram is doing and social media is doing, you know, how is information about environmental awareness being disseminated by even our environmental societies and environmental agencies, government parastatals, whose immediate job it is, then you can imagine that we still have a lot to do. Another practical way that artists can work is working with technology. And working with technology is that a lot of these messages have to be just like how people rebrand countries and how branding agencies take the message out there. You know, how we're able to have interdisciplinary convergences where you see artists, you know, working with website designers, working with apps developers to make sure that information is out there. Think about the sort of art that is being out there now and how the NFTs, you know, gained so much widespread popularity, and see what artists can do in this regard. So I think these are things that we need to do. Now, the easy part, like I said, you know, is creating art. Now, appointments are very important. We live in a country where we don't have round pegs, you know, in terms of appointments. In round holes, you know, how are artists and even other members of society agitating against the wrong appointments? If you have, for instance, a minister who is not versed, you know, art-wise, is not versed with how art, you know, our culture, you know, can be used, you know, to impact upon climate change. How are you going to get the right policies? Let's start from the basics. So appointments there must be proper advocacy. You know, you must appoint the right one in the right places. You know, policies must be looked into. Museums, our national institutions, our galleries, you know, what sort of sponsorships are they taking? You know, are they taking sponsorships, you know, from companies that have a long history of environmental degradation? It starts from there, because the easy part is getting artists to create posters or to create materials. But when you look at the difficult part, which has to do with funding, you know, are we taking funds from, for instance, companies that have a history of laying to waste our Niger Delta? You know, these are instances that we need to look into. People who are appointed to these boards, do they have a history of championing environmental causes? And if not, why are they appointed? That's the difficult part. So that's my contribution. Thank you.
Much. That's quite comprehensive. You have a way of getting into everything and all that. Fatola, do you have anything to add to that? And at this point, I'd really like our participants to take whatever questions they have as we go on. So Fatola, do you have anything to add to it? And I'm checking to see if we have any questions on the chat box. Because so Fatola,
okay.
Please.
Yeah, Mr. Oliver has actually like touched on a very, you know, broad aspect of this. I'm just going to add my own little, you know, very brief, and which is about, you know, education and empowerment, because artists are creating, but really, for us to effectively create, you know, we need to be empowered, we need to be educated. So, and since, as Mr. Oliver rightly said, you know, the African youth population is immense. I mean, it holds the key to the continent's future. And even the United Nations Environment Program, they said something, you know, around like creative workshops and, you know, mentorship programs, actually. So I think once we have more programs, once we have more workshops, once we have more of these to utilize art, you know, it can inspire young Africans, it can inspire artists to, to become environmental stewards. That's how we become ambassadors of this cause, through workshops, through interactive art installations. Thanks to technology now, we have physical art. We can also have digital versions of these artworks. So if once we have more of this, we're able to add positive change to
okay, so basically there has to be more forums for putting up the discussions, and also from what Tenny said earlier in terms of capacity, to build capacity and let us know that it's a win-win situation at the end of the day, because you bring in different strategies, and it's also is inclusive, because like I like the example she gave about integrating the misconstruence around the Yaba area and all of that. I think that's the way to go for everything at the end of the day. And I'd like to just read something from Dr. Anil Fok here. He says, I'm looking at the likely obstacles that activists may face during sensitization, especially in rural areas, with some of these practices that are their source of livelihood, e.g. deforestation, bush burning, and all that. So we're really pressed for time. So I'll say maybe 5 seconds each, if that's not so 10 seconds each, if that's not too small a time to put our thoughts out. But he said he wants to know what are the likely obstacles that activists may face during sensitization, particularly in rural areas. So who wants to go first? Okay, Patola.
So, I think a lot of it has to do with, the security and the state of the nation. I and my team were working on a project at a time, and we needed to go to certain places to take photographs. We needed to document the state of that environment, how polluted it is, how it seems nobody's really paying attention to what is going on here. And from an artistic point of view, we wanted to take those pictures, create compelling artworks, and use even source for biodegradable materials in our works and mural projects and all. But in the process of getting to the venue, to the location, we were not allowed to do what we came to do. And I provided my means of identification, all of my other, in fact, it got so bad, our cameras and gadgets were almost taken away from us by the local community. I tried to make some calls to okay, we're just creatives, we're meant to create, we're just here to do, we've taken all the necessary permits, we've done everything, but it seems nobody, we ended up leaving that venue, we ended up suspending the project at the time being, because it was, going to that part of town, it was not as safe, for the average artist in Lagos. And I think that's one of the major challenges that we're facing, really, to answer the question.
Okay, so Tenny, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, that's one of the importance of capacity building, so that things like this are either reduced or even just not happening, and the other way is to make it a win-win for all, as I said earlier, because that's the only way you can have buy-in from the community and have buy-in from all the other aspects. And so if, for instance, now, if there's a way to reduce or to make the ability to not allow this to happen, then it kind of reduces it. So if the capacity is built, if the people understood the rural areas are taken along, it will reduce the amount of work that needs to be done. It's a gradual process. It takes a bit. It's a long process. It's not very easy. It can't be done in a day. So I really understand where Patola was coming from, in terms of just at that point you look at your safety and you have to just decide, well, we can't do it if the culture has not been built to that extent. So I'll just stop there.
So Oliver, 5 seconds.
5 seconds. Okay, I'll quickly add to what the previous speakers. I will add short-term and perhaps long-term solutions. Short-term is awareness. For instance, deforestation is a very good question the member of the audience raised. When you look at deforestation, it's all about profiting from trees. Now, if you have policies that will ensure that more trees are planted for every one felled, I think that's very important. You know, when you look at bush burning and all of that, you also think about cordoning of areas where all we can do in that area is to fell the trees. So we will have proper permits to do that. Now, if you need to always fell trees, then you must think about can the frequency be reduced if you have better storage facilities, if what is already been felled is better stored, for instance, and better utilized. That's another way. Now, long-term solutions could also be, for instance, outrightly, you know, just the same way that we're looking towards electric-powered vehicles, for instance, because we know that we need to reduce our energy emission. It's the same way we can look towards other materials. I know, for instance, the trend now for many carpenters in Lagos is not to work with wood. They work with MDF boards, which is a sort of processed product. When you encourage technology, you will find other ways and other means to create the same product or something similar to the product without having to use a natural resource. Even butter, for instance. You know, milk isn't used for butter in many cases, but you have plant resources.
Scientifically proven that you can last for hours and hours with this African secret.
Okay, Adekunle, please, can you mute yourself?
You might also have other areas where, you know, other products, for instance, galvanized steel can be used in place of wood. So I think these are things that, of course, will ease deforestation and make sure that some areas, you know, are preserved for trees, for growing trees to preserve our planet and environment.
Some of the routes given by ECOWAS expired on Sunday.
You had your hand up. Do you want to ask your question or you want to put in the chat box?
On Thursday,
Mr. Modu, please.
Sorry, I want to even just add something that I think
still hasn't.
Let's get Mr. Amodu to mute himself. Amodu Adekunle, please, can you mute? There's a lot of background noise from Amodu Adekunle.
Yes, he's had his hand up for quite a while, and I was hoping that he could ask his question now.
Okay, he's muted.
Okay, no, I've just muted him and see how it goes. Okay, so can go on, Tim.
So one thing that I even just wanted to add was the government's influence in all of this in terms of the legislation and policies that could be added to improve to increase the to hasten the process of capacity building would be the inclusion of either some kind of taxes, or because now there are things like, if this is just even for carbon emissions, and there's a carbon tax that the government is looking to integrate into Nigeria, and it's a great idea because it's probably the fastest way to get people to be more conscious, which goes back to what I was saying earlier about, you know, the consciousness of it being in people's mindsets of how to be more sustainable. And, you know, they've now introduced a carbon tax system on emissions, first of all, but it will go on to other aspects of, you know, the environment. And now they're starting with gasoline and, you know, to reduce the importation of it. And this is like a subliminal way of encouraging consumers to just start thinking about switching to cleaner fuels, you know, which goes to reducing cutting of the trees so that you can use briquettes, for instance. You just being more conscious of how you are going to now be more cleaner to the environment. And so people would want to avoid these taxes. So in order to avoid the tax, you would want to start being more conscious deliberately, because there's now a component of, you know, you have to pay. And so once the government starts doing things like this, more of these, there would be a domino effect on all the other aspects that would start to make people to be more conscious about this.
Yeah.
And so I think that's probably, you know, the trajectory that we're probably going to start seeing more of in the next 9 months, 9 to 12 months.
Okay, thank you so much, Temi. Mr. Adekunle, you can speak now. You can hand it raised up. You can ask your question or make your comment. Please speak. If you can hear me, Mr. Modu, please speak.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, please, you can make your comment or ask your question. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to make comment because I've been listening to the panelists there. I think one thing that we need, and which we need to start with, especially maybe in Africa or in Nigeria here, is to start the education from the grassroots, maybe from the primary school. Start teaching the children how to keep environment safe. I want to relate an experience. The first time I have opportunity to travel out of Nigeria to US. So while walking on the street with the daughter of my host, we bought some sweet wrap packs, some candies. While I unwrap my home, I throw it down. Then the guy said, "Uncle, you don't do that." Then she bent down and picked the wrapper, the biscuit wrapper. He said, in the next walking, we are going to see trash bin and put it in the trash bin. I was so ashamed of myself. Then I was now thinking that if a young girl like this, I think if I'm to rate her age, maybe about 6 years old, then correcting me that no, don't throw biscuit wrapper down. So you can see that the education must start from the grassroots, from the family. I also have the background of working with SPDC and institutions like that. They also taught us or teach all the workers on how to manage waste. Even you see the waste bin marked green, maybe the one for solid waste, the one for dry waste, this and that. And actually, that helped me in my house in managing waste inside my house. So the education must start from the grassroots. And the second one that I put to it is that the government should also establish people like an agent. We have them in those days when I was growing up in the West. They call them wole wole. If we see these people,
okay, please can you begin to round this up? Thank you.
Yeah, the government should. We should have an agent that should be managing the way people throw their waste or managing their waste and give them education. Not that they should be going to all these books, be collecting bribe from them when they violate the waste management policy. That's my comment and contribution, please.
Okay, so Mr. Adekunle, you're talking about some way of enforcement mechanisms being developed to be able to monitor the way people are using it to monitor and also to enhance people's compliance with policies on ground. And also we've also talked about trying to integrate awareness at every level. I mean, you're talking about starting from the most basic place, which is primary schools. And that is also, yes, because UNESCO is all about education and all of that. So it's really important that we also put our minds to this. But I wanted to also ask Teni, there's a question here for you. It said, okay, sorry. The person says, I am interested in knowing, okay, no, first for Oliver, I hope you know this now. It says, your comment on decolonizing our culture is interesting. How can we improve on this? That question is for you, Oliver. Then the other one is for Mr. Fatola. It says, how can arts be used as a tool for activism for climate change? And then, of course, I think he has asked that question because he shared an experience he had where they were trying to get some materials and the resistance they got from there. And then this is for you, Teni. It says, how can we start the culture of upscaling and recycling in Nigeria? And how can sustainable fashion become more mainstream? So I'll give you both 5 seconds each to answer that question. We'll move on to the next.
Okay, well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for that question. And I mentioned earlier about, things like fashion swaps and circular economy, fashion, and a lot of that has grown. And I think it's just about the way it's packaged, and served to the community is the best way it's packaged is the best way for it to be received. So if we go back to, for instance, you look at other countries in the US, UK, it's now a full mission that is being driven so hard. All the big department stores, for instance, in the UK, there are places like Harrods and all these other places, they're all having a circular economy, circular fashion component to it. So as you are buying this clothes 100% new, there's also an opportunity to wear it and return it, or even just rent it out. And they would also help you rent it out to other people who just want to use it for a party or an event, and then they send it back. So that way you are paying a fraction of the price for that outfit, and you are also reducing the waste because you're not keeping it, it's not sitting in your cupboard, and you're not producing overproduction because you sent it back and people can then buy it. Another person can either rent it, or if they love it so much, they wear it and they buy it. And those kinds of habits are ways to, one, save costs. So they put a cost-saving component to it. The minute you do that, people love saving money. People love finding ways to just, reduce waste or reduce your expenditure. And the minute you put a component of value to it, that is the way to drive people to buy into it. So it's to create that buying. And once you found savvy ways to create a buying for a movement, such as being more circular, you will be able to have a better way to get people to be more conscious about their recycling. And, just as what Mr. Amudu had mentioned about that mindset shift, being behavioral change, creating the behavioral change in an efficient way, starting from grassroots. So we're educating the students in schools and starting from that component, so that by the time that child gets to 15 or even goes older and has her own children and has, a marriage and has her own children, she's already had that mindset for a longer period of time. And that possibility or the probability of that mindset being converted to the next generation is a lot more higher. And so I think that's pretty much what I would, my contribution would be. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Tani. Oliver, you want to answer the question?
Yes, I can answer my question. Hear me?
And I'll still keep pressing in 5 seconds, please.
All right. Can you hear me? Is it clear?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can hear you.
All right. I think it had to do with decolonization. There are many ways that we can decolonize. I think it first of all starts with how do you tell your story about your community? For instance, there's this saying that until the lion tells his own story, the story of the hunter will always be told by the hunter. And of course, that is to their own advantage. And therefore, it is very important that we claim our histories, claim our stories. We've gone through colonialism and it's had its negative impacts, including, for instance, loss of language. How are we able to revitalize lost languages? How are we able to also tell that have impacted us in the past, and how are we able to tell these stories in a way best shows us in better light? I'll think straight away about 97 Benin punitive expedition, in which the Oba of Benin and the kingdom was sacked, and artifacts were taken away. When you look at the way that story is told, it's told to the advantage, of the British, who looked at it, more of a punitive expedition. Meanwhile, it was actually, in fact, an invasion where the Benin kingdom and the Oba was stripped of his of all reverence to him, and all their histories and their culture, they were stripped. Now, decolonization also continues, for instance, with repatriation. For instance, these items were repatriated. It also takes place, that's one of the things that you have to do with decolonization, where stolen items, for instance, loss of artifacts, human remains are returned back to the indigenous communities. You know, stories that must be told about those communities must be written by indigenous authors too. That's a very important aspect, you know, because you cannot have a story retold by, you know, Western authors, you know, happenings, for instance, in your local community. All languages should be revitalized, very important. Gender roles, for instance, if that women are suppressed into those societies is a Western concept. It was never like that in Africa. In Africa, for instance, you know, women had very strong political roles and were very instrumental to the operational working of society. But when the Westerners came, you know, they suppressed the women as a way of suppressing us. Because part of. So these are various ways that of decolonization, you know, that extremely important. Reclaiming your history and healing. You know, for instance, you have to give strategies and opportunities for communities to heal collectively, as opposed to healing from individual perspectives. So collective healing, you know, and people, especially for instance in Benin, have used various ways like memory, you know, to remember their past and, you know, tell their stories. Another way is also testimonies, you know, testimonies of people and recording of history, you know, is another way of decolonizing culture. Even what you wear, you know, these are ways of decolonization that I think that is decolonizing culture. Thank you.
So very much for that extensive response. I have, is it NATO? Sorry? Nedo Osayande. Nedo Osayande, do you want to ask the question? Have you had your hand up a while back? Or have we addressed the question you have in mind? Nedo. And then Mr. Kunle Sotunde, please, can you, if you have a question, can you ask? Otherwise, I would please request that you mute yourself. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Okay, so Nedo, and then Dozie or Haji as well. Do you have Dozie or Haji? Do you want to ask the question now? Okay, so in the absence of all of that, I have a final thought I would like you to also share with us here. And it says, what are your recommendations for policymakers, creatives, and other relevant stakeholders? I know that at some point in our discussion, these things have been touched upon, but we'd like to have specifics for instance, in the areas of policy making and then protecting our environment. Is it a case that we want policies specifically for protecting the environment? For instance, some of these cultural practices, there used to be a place, an area within my maternal home where my mother told us that in times past, the place used to be a rich, I mean, it's a beautiful place. I mean, it has trees, very old trees, it's a beautiful shade, but they weren't cut down in time past because they were taken to be some kind of evil forest where people that committed acts of desecration on the land were sent to and they never came back. Well, if some parts of history says that while they went inside there, they were probably kidnapped and sold as slaves, but because they never ever came back. And then also they could have on the other side started up their, I mean, had a common resettlement and started families, because there is a community that sprang up from that side. So we don't know which it is. But then is there supposed to be like a clear-cut policy that says, okay, for this particular area, because we have the biodiversity protection policies, but then they are rarely obeyed. But this kind of old age practices are able to help protect ecosystem in certain areas. So is it that they should be enhanced upon through policy, or is it a case that we should just take it that, okay, it's natural, so we just allow it to be? I don't know if we get the point I'm trying to make. So we can just give our thoughts on this, please. Thank you.
So I didn't quite get the question. I thought you were making a contribution.
Yeah. The question was, what are your recommendations for policymakers, creatives, and other relevant stakeholders? And that's why I gave the illustration. Do we now come up with policies that should help and that would enhance culture as a way of protecting our environment, or we just allow it to still be the way it is, as in let it be part of folktales or olden days practices as they are commonly called? Thank you.
You cannot have policies to enhance culture. It's more, I mean, what we're really talking about is how can we imbibe culture into our policies? I think really that's maybe how we should frame it, you know, and of course with that, we must create new models, models that are working now, you know, that are in existence rather now are not working. And so they must imbibe culture, which is the way of thinking of the people. Now, it's not only to have culture, you know, and policies, but also we must be able to disseminate, you know, to make sure that it is widespread. You know, how are we able to disseminate? Through technology? We must take into account, you know, new ways of disseminating, including social media platforms like Instagram that appeal to younger generation, of which Africa is going to be mostly made up of youth in the next 20 years or thereabouts. So we have to have policies that are forward-thinking. Then we must have policies that will ensure that we catch youth young. We should have subjects right from the primary school, just like you can study Christian religious knowledge and mathematics. We must have subjects that have to do entirely. There's nothing wrong with us having climate change as a subject in primary school and making sure that is even offered at up to JAM level. I think it's extremely important. Then we need to have policies that will determine who and who is appointed to proper, I mean, parastatals in charge, you know, of the environment. For instance, we cannot. And you know, must have punitive measures, you know, inculcated into our laws. So I think policies must deal with that. Those are my contributions. Thank you.
Well said. Very well said, Oliver. Kenny, last thoughts?
Well, I've said a lot about this.
I think I'm going to give you just 3 seconds to do that.
Okay.
And
it's
Fatola, 3 seconds as well.
Just to you know, add to what everybody else has already said. And it's pretty much just being more conscious. I'll just repeat what I said earlier, and the punitive measures and the education. If you continue building capacity, there's no way that we will not start to see change quicker. And I think that's the best way to go about it.
Okay, if we keep raising awareness, we keep building capacity and making sure, and then dissemination models are very, very important, and it's a way. And then another aspect that we really talked about here that's quite interesting is integrating the youths into the whole thing, because they're I use the word, the future is theirs at the end of the day. Okay, so Fatola, you have anything to add, please? Hello? Okay, he's still muted.
I think he has added his.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry.
Okay, so last thoughts, please.
Yeah, we've said basically what needs to be said. I mean, I can only just state out 1 or 2 other points, which is like creative documentation. You know, we need to like document instances of environmental degradation, human rights abuses, and other negative consequences. When we document all these things, you know, in art, media, film, more of it, then we're able to address this. We also need to like create alternative channels of communications. That is like, you know, in environments where freedom of expression is restricted, you know, we can use these alternative channels, you know, such as like maybe digital platforms, encrypted communication, you know, integrating NFTs, the blockchains, alternative channels to push, the narrative for that. We also need like cultural resilience, to emphasize the resilience and cultural identity of communities that is affected by, the impunity. We need to highlight how these communities have historically coped with these challenges, and to also promote cultural practices that, promote sustainability and resilience. And then long-term advocacy is also something we can also recognize, knowing that pushing for policy reforms and accountability is a long-term endeavor, right? So we need to continue the conversation. We need to continue to create the art. We need to continue to build the networks. We need to continue to raise awareness over time to gradually shift the public opinion and put pressure on the authorities as well. So there are, advocate for art funding, because I figured it's hard for creatives to bring some ideas to life, especially in this part of the world. About a lot of them are, they struggle to lobby for increased funding for the arts initiatives that promote sustainability and engage communities in dialogue. So, we need to advocate for arts funding. We also need to do more participation in events, exhibitions, to collaborate with NGOs and nonprofits, to also use data and research, to incorporate relevant data, research, case studies, in our presentations, in meetings such as this, to highlight the economic, social, and environmental benefits, and to also engage elected officials, because we have people, we have ministers in places, we have all these big men in quotes that can make things happen. So we need to reach out to them, the local, regional, national policymakers, to discuss the potential impact of art, in advocating for this sustainability, and, also workshops, seminars such as this. We need more of this. We need more of this, and kudos to the host and the platform. You guys are doing an amazing work.
Thank you.
So let me just stop there.
Okay, thank you so much. I've also learned a lot, and I believe our participants has as well. So we're talking about more awareness raising, building capacity, integration, in being inclusivity, making sure that everybody is carried along at the end of the day. And it's a never-ending discussion, because we need to put this continually in the fora so that people will hear about it. And like Fashola has just said, we need to also bring on board those of our policymakers so that they can understand the essence of what this is about, which is to drive climate change, enhance mitigation and adaptation, and overall increase climate action. So with that, I think we've come to the end of today's discussion. I want to thank all our panelists. It's been very, very interesting having you here. Thank you. It's been, I've learned quite a lot. And I know that this is not the last we're going to be having this. And then we hope that in the next segment, we're going to be hosting the next series of the webinar. We'll have yourselves come join us at the same, and also to give more knowledge, share more knowledge with us. Thank you so much for the insights. I want to say thank you to our participants for staying on. I hope it's been as rewarding for you as it was for me. There's some hashtags in the chat box. Please feel free to use it. And thank you, and do enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.